Good morning, and welcome to another Seize the Day. Today is Friday, December the 2nd. Can you believe that? December the 2nd. 23 more days and it's Christmas. And this Christmas falls on a Sunday, as does the New Year's Day. So it's not often that you wake up on a Sunday morning and you get to spend it not only with your immediate family, but with your whole church family. I'm always amazed at how many come out when Christmas falls on a Sunday, and kids come in their little pajamas, and it's a lot of fun. So looking forward to it this year. We have been in a study for Advent now, and we're calling it God's People Living Generously, and it's our study for the 2022 Advent season. This year, we've taken on this topic of generosity, and we will be looking in the weeks to come about what it means to demonstrate this level of generosity. What does it mean to be a good steward of the resources that God has given us? Because I think more than ever, it's not just about money. It's about the stewardship of our time, of our talent, of our treasure. It's a stewardship that if we really do it well and live it out into the world around us, it's going to affect change. It's going to affect people's lives. It's going to give credence to this profession that we make. People will see in us something different. There'll be an engagement in the world around us rather than a detachment. One of the things that that makes me a little sad is sometimes the church, we have a tendency of looking out at the world and thinking like the world is winning, that somehow or another the devil is stronger than the very Son of God who came to redeem it. No. Very often the collapse that we see is because people are no longer putting into practice the will and purposes of God. Each one is about doing what is right in his own eyes, and the consequence of that is the collapse within our own souls, but also within our relationships, within our communities, the world around us. Come on, like so much of the aggression and hatred and violence that we see, where is that coming from? It's not coming from God, I can tell you that. And if all you have to do is just cursory look and realize that when God acts in judgment, it's decisive, right? Well, here now, we are living in these days in which God is saying more than ever, let your light shine. Let people see your good work and glorify your Father in heaven. We're the salt of the earth. We've been called into this very moment, and so I don't lean back and think, oh, this is so terrible. I think that we have a powerful gospel, this good news of the kingdom of heaven, that is showcased for us in the life of Jesus. And now that we have this word, we can read about all of the work. Are there going to be obstacles? Absolutely. Is the evil one going to contend against us? Sure he is. But I read the book, and so have you, and we win. This is a day by day exercise that you and I are called into. But greater is he that is in us than he that is in the world. So my friends, that's why we study this word, so that we can become stronger. We understand a little bit more about what God's will and purposes are, so that we can go out into the world with a sense of peace, and we also go out into the world representing him well. So we started off looking at this model of generosity in the incarnation. God the Father giving his most precious possession, Jesus giving his life, Mary giving her future, Joseph his reputation, the shepherds their time, the Magi their money. And we saw in this that everyone was participating, and the outcome was nothing but transformative for the world. And so we're being called now to enter into this very same scheme, but we bring our time, we bring our money, we bring our reputations, our futures, our life, our most cherished possessions. and we demonstrate a fidelity to God who promises never to leave us or forsake us. So that brought us to a consideration of a wonderful chapter that's found in 2 Corinthians chapter 8 and verses 10 through 15. And what I'd like to do is I'm just going to read this passage for you, and then we can make a number of comments about together. Paul is writing to these Corinthian believers, and he's going to give them this illustration from the church that's in Macedonia. And he says this, he says, "Now, brothers, we want you to know about the grace that God has given the Macedonian churches. Out of the most severe trial, their overflowing joy and their extreme poverty welled up in rich generosity." Think about that. The generosity of the Macedonian churches had at its very root a severe trial that had come upon them. The Macedonian churches is around near where Turkey is presently. And, in that region of the world. And he says, "And out of the most severe trial, their overflowing joy, their extreme poverty, welled up in rich generosity. For I testify that they gave as much as they were able, and even beyond their ability." So they gave as much as they were able. Nobody was asking them to give more, but even though there was obviously a sacrifice on their part. And it says, "And they urgently pleaded us for the privilege of sharing in this service to the saints." And that word privilege is the Greek word that we have been translating in this passage, grace. This grace of giving. And it says, and they did not do as we expected, but they gave, notice here the order here, they gave themselves first to the Lord and then to us in keeping with God's will. So it's not about being coerced. It's not about someone, duping them. They did what they did because first they recognized something that God had done for them. Their allegiance was first to God, and then they looked at their circumstances and thought, how can I alleviate some of the crisis that is taking place in the Jerusalem church? And so look in verse 6. It says, "So we urge Titus, since he had earlier made a beginning, to bring also to completion this act of grace on your part." So this idea that they had made a beginning, and now he was asking them to bring it to completion. He says, "But just as you excel in everything, in faith, in speech, in knowledge, in complete earnestness, and in your love for us, see that you also excel in this grace of giving." So this whole idea of the grace of giving, it is a privilege. It's part of our spiritual maturity. It should be as much as faith and knowledge is a part of one's spiritual maturity, our growth. It says here, so is giving. You can't divorce that which it seems to sometimes just garner our hearts the most, right? Jesus was correct when he said, "Where your treasure is, there your heart will be also." And whatever it is that we cherish, whatever it is that we treasure the most, and unfortunately, sometimes it comes down to our stuff. And here, so the Apostle Paul is writing here and tells us, listen, as much as the Macedonian Christians here, out of their severe trials came joy and came a generosity. They were giving beyond what they expected, but they gave what they had, not what they didn't have. They weren't like we said, playing the lottery. Like, oh, if I only win the lottery, then I could be generous. No, just be generous with what you have, because what we've learned is generosity is not the size of the wallet. It's not the size of the checkbook. It's not the size of the check. Generosity has everything to do with the size of one's heart. And that's why Paul goes on and says, I'm not commanding you, but I want to test the sincerity of your love by comparing it with the earnestness of others. For you know that the grace of our Lord Jesus Christ, that though he was rich, yet for your sakes he became poor, so that through his poverty you might become rich. That was Jesus. That's a beautiful way of expressing what has been expressed to the Philippian Christians, that though he existed in the form of God, he did not think it robbery to be equal with God, but he humbled himself and became a man, taking on the form of a servant, being obedient to the point of death, even death on a cross. So that at the name of Jesus, every knee will bow and every tongue will confess that Jesus Christ is Lord. See, Jesus, who always existed with the Father, has now laid aside that glory and privilege and became the very Son of God that would give his life a ransom for ours. That in itself is cause for you and I to look at ourselves differently, to look at God differently, look at our stuff differently. And he says, and here's my advice about what is best for you in this matter. And now what we're going to see is Paul is going to be speaking about some obstacles that need to be removed if we truly are going to live out this life of generosity. He says, here's my advice. He says, last year you were the first not only to give, but also to have the desire to do so. Now finish the work, so that your eager willingness to do it may be matched by your completion of it, according to your means. Again, you see, this isn't coercion. This isn't coercion. This is people looking at what they have and then choosing to be generous with it. Nobody is conscripting a certain amount. It's not like the tax guy is coming to your house and banging on the door. No. It's saying here that you have to determine what's in your heart to give. And when you recognize that all that you have really comes from him, he's the one who's given you life and breath. He's the one who gives you opportunity. He's the one that gives you talent, strength, resources. And he's saying, can we use those resources in a way that is demonstrating that we are in sync with God's will and purposes for the world around us? And here you could see that in Jesus. Jesus had it all. Jesus was in a position unlike any. And yet, looking at the need of men lost in sin, he came to rescue them. He brought what was needed for their condition. And he didn't come with a check for $1 million for everybody, did he? No, he came to set us free from the greatest captive that we will experience in this life. And that is our own passions, this nature that we have inherited. And God says he's come to free us, to bring freedom into one's life. So he's saying, look, you have to match the willingness to do it with the completion of it. And that's kind of like where we left it off last week. And what I'd like to do now is talk to you a little bit more about this. Just one last point, right? When he says the challenge is to finish the work, because it's always this challenge to persevere. There's this gap that we have to close between willingness and completion. As it said earlier, between starting and finishing. Paul makes it clear that this is still very much a heart issue. He says if the willingness is there, the gift is acceptable according to what one has, not according to what he does not have. You know, again, I said it earlier, right? It's not about, I could be generous if I won the lottery. We got to be generous with what we have, not what we do not have. Because generosity is really a sign of the condition of one's heart, not the checkbook. But there's something else here too. Look at verse 13. in 2 Corinthians 8. Paul's intent in all of this is plain. He writes, "Our desire is not that others might be relieved while you are hard pressed, but that there might be equality." Now, the equality doesn't mean the equality as we think it. But let's continue to read here. It says, "At the present time, your plenty will supply what they need, so that in turn, their plenty will supply what you need. Then there will be equality. As it is written, he who gathered much did not have too much, and he who gathered little did not have too little." See, the text raises a very interesting question, right? What is meant by equality? It's not what we see bantered about today. The context of our passage this morning reveals what Paul meant by equality. It's not an equal distribution of goods and property among believers. That's not what this is saying. Rather, Paul is calling for equal relief from the burdens that are being associated with their need. People having something to drink, something to eat, some clothes to wear. Isn't that also part of what Jesus asks us to do in the world around us? Is, to pay attention to those kinds of hard-pressed needs around us. It's not talking about an equality of goods and property, that everybody has to have the same. In fact, when he writes here in verse 15 of 2 Corinthians 8, and listen to me on this, 2 Corinthians chapter 8, verse 15 is a quote, because he writes here, "As it is written, he who gathered much did not have too much, and he who gathered little did not have too little." What is that? Why is he quoting that? The reason why he's quoting that is because it's not about the equality of goods that everybody has, but it was that their needs were being met. And why do I say that? Because that text comes from Exodus chapter 16, verse 15. I read it yesterday. I'm going to read it to you again. In this text, God gives Moses words to share with the Israelites who were about to experience the miracle of manna. They were out in the desert. They had fled from the oppressive hands of the Egyptians. They were enslaved for over 400 years, and God, in a miraculous way, delivers them out of the hands of Egypt. Now they're brought out into this wilderness. Where are they going to have food? How are they going to survive this wilderness journey as they go into the promised land? See, this is where God had done tremendous miracles through Moses, right? The bringing forth water in the midst of this desert, or manna from heaven. When God allowed this manna to fall down as if it were snow, and people were to gather it and eat it, to make cakes out of it, it fed them while they were there. When the Israelites saw it, this is what it says in verse 15. When the Israelites saw it, they said, "What is it?" For they did not know what it was. Moses said to them, "It is the bread the Lord has given you to eat. This is what the Lord has commanded. Each one is to gather as much as he needs." Right? "Take an omer for each person you have in your tent." So if you had a lot of people in your tent, you had more omer. You had more manna. If you had fewer people, then you had less manna. But it was just so that people can eat. It was to reduce their hunger. The Israelites did as they were told, and some gathered much and some little. And when they measured it by the omer, he who gathered much did not have too much, and he who gathered little did not have too little. Each one gathered as much as he needed. See, this is God's way of telling us we have a responsibility to help those in need. And it's always God's idea. Can I read to you a text? Let me put this in this text for you, because this is a great text to be reminded of. Matthew 23 and Isaiah 58. Two really great passages, and we're going to just take a quick look at them this morning. So I'm gonna just refer us now to this passage here. So Matthew 23 and Isaiah 58. Why don't we look at Isaiah 58 first? Here, Isaiah is writing, and he is criticizing just the religious kind of, practices that people were doing by rote. It's like saying, well, I just gotta, I just gotta go to church today. Never really thinking that going to church was really an exercise for me, not just so much for God. But when I went, it wasn't just to put in time, but it was to grow in my relationship with Jesus. Or think about any kind of, spiritual exercise that you do. You could pray for hours, but if your heart's not in it, what good does it do? So these Jews were fasting, right? Denying themselves a meal, which was supposed to be a time for them to take the time that they would normally be eating and then devote that time in seeking after God. It was a way of helping them to bring focus to their requests. And yet, God was looking at all of this fasting and was displeased. And why? This is what he says in Isaiah 58. He says, is this not the kind of fast that I have chosen? Is this the kind of fast I have chosen? Only a day for a man to humble himself? Is it only for bowing one's head like a reed or lying on sackcloth and ashes? Is that what you call a fast? A day acceptable to the Lord? Is not this the kind of fasting I have chosen? And listen to the kind of fast that God talks about. To loose the chains of injustice and untie the cords of the yoke, to set the oppressed free and break every yoke. Is it not to share your food with the hungry and to provide the poor wanderer with shelter? When you see the naked, to clothe them, and not to turn away from your own flesh and blood. For then your light will break forth like the dawn, and your healing will quickly appear. Then your righteousness will go before you, and the glory of the Lord will be your rear guard. Then you will call, and the Lord will answer. You will cry for help, and he will say, here I am. If you do away with the yoke of oppression, with the pointing finger and malicious talk, and if you spend yourselves in behalf of the hungry and satisfy the needs of the oppressed, then your light will rise in the darkness, and your night will become like the noonday. The Lord will guide you always. He will satisfy your needs in a sun-scorched land and will strengthen your frame. You will be like a well-watered garden, like a spring whose waters never fail. Your people will rebuild the ancient ruins and will rise up the age-old foundations. You will be called repairer of the broken walls, restorer of streets with dwellings. See what is destroyed. This is all in the context of the calamity that's going to fall upon Israel because of their disobedience to God. But here he's saying, look, you want to seek me out. This is the kind of fasting that I want. Not just a day for somebody to humble themselves. But you notice what he says here is to alleviate the need, right? To share your food with the hungry, to provide the poor wanderer with shelter. You see, this is what God is looking for. And and God says he's going to satisfy our needs, not all of our greeds, but our needs. And he's asking us to do the same. And why do I say that? Well, now look at Matthew. I put 23. It's actually here. Let me go back and I'll correct that for you. This is actually Matthew 25. So I'll correct that. All right. So there we go. And in Matthew 25, it says, then the king will say to those on his right, this is Jesus speaking, And he's talking to the disciples on this day that's coming when God is going to separate the sheep from the goats. And he says, then the king will say to those on the right, come, you who are blessed by my Father, take your inheritance, the kingdom prepared for you since the creation of the world. For I was hungry, and you gave me something to eat. I was thirsty, you gave me something to drink. I was a stranger, you invited me in. I needed clothes, and you clothed me. I was sick, and you looked after me. I was in prison, and you came in to visit me. And then the righteous will answer him, Lord, when did we see you hungry and feed you, or thirsty and give you something to drink? When did we see you a stranger and invite you in, or needing clothes and clothe you? When did we see you sick or in prison and go to visit you? The king will reply, I tell you the truth, whatever you did for one of the least of these brothers of mine, you did for me. See, it's the same. The call in Isaiah and the call of Jesus in Matthew 25, it's always the same. And here you and I are being called upon to be a part of that. I know for Bethany, there is a strictness by the way in which we use the funds that people give. And it's not just to build people up in the most holy faith by providing them with opportunities like today, right? To open up this word together, to instruct our children, to be with our students. I shared with you the other day, we had over 60, I think it was like close to 60, 65 students that came for a Thanksgiving dinner. And then when you added in all of the helpers and stuff like that, it was a beautiful sight to see. Yeah, but Bethany also gets involved in helping people. We've come alongside them in their moments of distress. We can't do everything for everyone, but we can help. We can buy food. We can pay for some oil sometimes. We get engaged, and this is as a church as a whole, because I know across the board people are exercising generosity on multiple levels. Now, while there are times when I might choose to help another so as to highlight what grace looks like, I do not believe we have the responsibility towards those who refuse to work or feel entitled. That's not what this text is talking about. This text is about people meeting real needs. And there are those who are in those positions because they refuse to work or they feel this level of entitlement. Can I end this by just reading you just a few of these verses? One is in 2 Thessalonians chapter 3. 2 Thessalonians chapter 3 says, for you yourselves know how you ought to follow our example. We were not idle when we were with you, nor did we eat anyone's food without paying for it. On the contrary, we worked night and day, laboring and toiling, so that we would not be a burden to any of you. That's Paul writing to the Thessalonian church. And he says, we did this not because we do not have the right to such help, but in order to make ourselves a model for you to follow. For even when we were with you, we gave you this rule. If a man will not work, he shall not eat. We hear that some among you are idle. They are busy. They are not busy. They are busybodies. And such people we command and urge in the Lord Jesus Christ to settle down and earn the bread that they eat. You see, when was the last time you heard somebody talk about that? Or how about this in Titus chapter 3? Our people must learn to devote themselves to doing what is good in order that they may provide for daily necessities and not live unproductive lives. That's in Titus chapter 3. This is Paul giving instruction to this pastor, Titus, in one of these, in the letter that was written to him. And he's telling him to instruct people to make sure that they're devoting themselves to work, to provide for their own needs, so that they don't live unproductive lives. Or in Ephesians 4:28, he says, he who's been stealing must steal no longer, but must work, doing something useful with his hands, that he may have something to share with those in need. Because we're always supposed to give out of our abundance. We're supposed to give and demonstrate a level of generosity. And that happens on multiple levels. So those obstacles that come is we got to get past just talking about generosity and beginning to do it. And do it with what we have, not what we don't. But also to do it in a way that demonstrates that that we're walking in this way that God would have us to walk, to being mindful of the kind of care that some in the world are in desperate need of. And we could be the hands and feet of Jesus in this generation. And when we do, when we share the good news of the kingdom, it comes with that much more weight because they know how much we care. My friends, it's a good challenge, isn't it? Just to sit back and think, how do I use the resources that God has given to me? It's a great challenge, great opportunities. Go out, seize the day, seize the weekend. And remember to always keep in mind that God is good all the time. God bless you, my friends. So glad to be a part of this community. And we'll continue our study in Advent this coming Monday. God bless.